Welcome to the video. Sauer guy here, and this is going to be an installation video for the Armory Craft dual adjustable trigger. Armory Craft makes tons of triggers for all different kinds of pistols. In mine, you can see I got this slightly curved one installed, as well as their super match style takedown lever, their skeletonized low mass hammer. I got their spring tuning kit installed in this 226, as well as their solid steel guy rod with their recoil spring. So they make tons of stuff for all different types of guns. If you go on their website and purchase any of this stuff, please feel free to use my discount code SIGSAUERGUY5. That will save you some money. So without further ado, let's get started installing a Armory Craft dual adjustable flat trigger in this 226. Okay, as always, we're going to make sure we're working on a safe firearm. So we're going to release our magazine. And then if you are interested in aluminum base pads, Armory Craft makes these. Very high quality, and they look great in the pistol. We're going to set that aside. We're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to visually and physically check to make sure that there are no rounds in the chamber. We're going to rotate our takedown lever, and we're going to release our slide. I'm going to set that aside. My next step is going to be to remove the takedown lever and the locking insert. So my takedown lever, I'm going to rotate this all the way forward, and I'm just going to use a pin or a punch to get that started, and then I'll rotate it, take it the rest of the way out. We'll set that right over here. The locking insert, it's going to remove by pulling out and slightly forward, and you'll see there's a little spring attached to it. This is for your slide release lever, and we're going to set that aside as well. Next, I'm going to remove my grip plates so I have access to the internal components. We're just going to remove 2 screws from each side. And we'll set this aside, flip it over, and do the same thing on the other side. The next step will be to remove the trigger pivot pin, our slide release lever, and our trigger bar spring on the other side. So what we're going to do first is just push this pin out a little bit. That'll release our slide release lever. Put that aside. And then we'll just pull the pin all the way out the other side. You can see the pin has a groove or a notch in the one end, but it doesn't in the other end. So this only goes in one way. And you'll see there are notches on the bottom as well, but we'll go over that during reassembly. So we will flip this over to the other side, and our trigger bar is hooked on, the spring is hooked onto the trigger bar on one end, and it goes through a hole in the frame on the other end. You can use a pick, a pure needle nose, or just your fingers. Comes out pretty easily. So we'll unhook that end, and we will pull it out of the hole on the other end. As you can see, it's kind of got a weird hook on one end and a regular hook on the other end. Our next step is going to be to remove the trigger bar and trigger assembly from the frame. Anything to do with the trigger bar and trigger, you need to exercise patience. This only comes in and out of there one way, and you don't want to force things and bend things and break things. So just be patient. Your frame has a lip right here, and this trigger bar needs to get by that lip. Okay, so sometimes it falls right out. Other times you're going to get so frustrated because you're working at it, and it just won't come out. So trigger all the way forward, it doesn't really work. Trigger all the way backwards, it doesn't work. It's going to kind of be like right here, a little less than half. And push the trigger straight that way, which will bring the trigger bar towards you, and push up at the same time like I just did. Okay, and it'll get by that lip. And then you just got to get the rest of it here in the back to go out that way. And pay attention to how easy sometimes this comes apart, because you're going to realize how hard it is to get that back in there sometimes. So I'm just going to keep moving things around. And I'm not forcing anything. It'll eventually just let itself go and come apart. And then our trigger just hinges on that pin on our trigger bar. And that's how you remove that. In this video, I'm just going to reinstall my slightly curved trigger. I prefer it in the 226. I do have both. I have the flat one in my 228. I love them equally as much. They both feel really good, but I'm just going to reinstall that one in the 226. On my 228 here, I have the pinky extension base pads from Armory Craft, all aluminum. These things look and feel amazing. So they do offer them with the pinky extension as well. So as I mentioned earlier, anything to do with the trigger and trigger bar, you really just need to exercise a lot of patience, okay? Sometimes this thing falls right in. Other times you're fumbling with it for a half an hour trying to get it in. Either way, if you do get frustrated, just put it down, walk away, take a break, come back, try it again. My reassembly, I find it easier for me to remove my safety lever. This has got the SRT kit in it, so the lever is a little bit longer. So I will remove that. And then I will also cock my hammer back because that moves the controls and stuff up a little bit, which gives a little bit more room for the trigger bar. So to remove the safety lever, it's pretty easy to do. I'm going to relieve the tension from my sear spring right here. It's just captured by a little post. So we just release it from that post so it can flop around. Now there's less tension on that pin, keeping it completely vertical so the pin doesn't fall out. I'm just going to slide the pin out a little bit with my tool. I'm going to hold the pin so it doesn't go anywhere. And then the safety lever will fall out. And then we'll push the pin back in. If you can't get it through, just use your punch to line everything back up again. And then slide the pin in. Make sure it's in flush. Just like that. And then I'm going to reattach that spring so that way there's tension on it and the pin does not fall out. I just use a little screwdriver, push the spring down and around and underneath that post, just like so. So now it won't fall out. And then you'll see if I cock the hammer back, things kind of move up and out of the way a little bit. So that's how I'm going to position everything to reinstall my trigger bar and trigger. Okay, so this has to go back in assembled like this. The trigger bar will go in pretty easily without the trigger on it, but then you cannot get it in such a position where you can slide the trigger back on it and get the trigger through the frame. Okay, so it's got to be assembled like this, and then it's got to go in with the back part here tipped up towards you and rotated slightly like that. That way it'll clear all the controls, and at the same time you need to put the trigger through the frame. You cannot get the trigger bar in there and then do this afterwards because you won't be able to get that in there properly. So I'm going to try to do this on camera. I might have to cut away. But don't force anything. Just kind of move things around, rotate things around. You can see how it's wanting to hit this part here that's made part of your frame, and then the bottom part of your trigger bar is trying to gouge into your frame. Don't force this stuff through there and scratch it all up and gouge it all up. If you get it in there just right, it will fit without forcing it. And if you hit the sear, it's obviously going to trip the hammer. So sometimes you're working at this and then all of a sudden it falls together. And then other times it takes patience. Just like that. So I got it past there. Now I just got to get my trigger bar to get down past that lip. And again, don't force things, just kind of move things around. It'll eventually fall right into place. It's not all the way back. So what I'm going to do is move my sear so my hammer goes up, and then see if I can clear it that way, which it did. So like I said, you got to kind of move things around as you're doing it, and it'll eventually fall right into place. Next, I'm going to reinstall my safety lever the exact same way that we took it apart. So I am going to release the tension from the sear spring. Then I'm going to slightly push the pin out. And then I'm going to drop my safety lever back in there, pushing on the pin until it finds the hole, and then make sure my pin is all the way in. And then I will reattach my sear spring. Just like that. My next step is going to be to reinstall my trigger bar spring. You see we got the weird hook on one end that goes through the frame, and then the regular hook on the other side that goes to the trigger bar itself. So we will take the weird end, put it through the hole there, and then our hook is going to go right to this notch in the bottom of the trigger bar. So you can use either a pick or needle nose pliers or something like that. There's not very much tension on this trigger bar spring, so it's pretty easy to do it right by hand. Just like that. So you can see we're hooked in down here and just through the hole in the frame. My next step will be to reinstall the trigger pivot pin. As we talked about in the beginning of the video, it has a notch in the front side of it, which there is not a notch in the back side, so it's going to go facing this way. And then there are notches in the side of it for the locking insert, which need to go at the roughly 7 o'clock position while this is installed. So it's going to sit just like that, and my notches are right here on the side here. So lined up the trigger, slide my pin through there, kind of move things around, and I'm going to push that all the way in, and actually I'm going to make some room in here, right in here, for my slide release lever, which goes on that pin. Just like that. And then we'll let that fall into place. So we need to make sure that this pin is completely horizontal. We need to make sure that our slide release is up against the side of the frame, because that locking insert needs to go in between the trigger and that release lever. This is just going to drop down in there and then slide slightly back, because you can see the notches are angled. Make sure your slide release is out of the way, just like that. If you have difficulty putting this in there, it's probably because your pin has walked its way out a little bit, so those notches in the pin don't allow the insert to slide into position, or your slide release lever is too far that way, not allowing the insert to get in between the lever and the trigger. Okay, before we button this up and put our grip plates on, there's a few items I'd like to talk about that Armory Craft has to offer. The first being their Ultimate Master Spring Tuning Kit. 8-piece spring kit. Comes with a 19, 18, 17, 16 pound hammer spring, your firing pin spring, firing pin safety spring, sear spring, and the competition sear spring purple. I have the 17 pound spring installed with the purple competition sear spring. Makes a huge difference when you can tune this stuff to your liking. They also have a solid steel guide rod and recoil spring kit with several different weight recoil springs. And then lastly, they offer walnut grips. These are the Target grips. It's got the flared magwell end and regular style walnut as well. Man, them Target grips, they totally change the way your pistol feels. Super high quality, very nice grips. So we're going to reinstall our grip plates. You don't need to crank these screws down super tight. You don't want to strip the hole out or damage the grips themselves. And because we messed with the pin here, make sure that it is recessed. It is not sticking out either side, so that way your slide goes on properly. So we'll reinstall that, rotate our takedown lever, release our slide. There you have it. Okay, our last and final step is to actually make the adjustments to the trigger. Armory Craft has supplied an Allen wrench with the trigger that fit the screws perfectly. So you have your pre-travel and over-travel screws. What we're going to do is we're going to run those in until the firearm doesn't fire or function properly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to back it out a little at a time until it does work properly. So the biggest problem people have with a dual adjustable trigger is they can get the firearm to fire, but it won't reset. And that's because your pre-travel screw is not adjusted properly. You need to back that off a little bit so the trigger can go a little bit further forward for the firearm to reset. And there you go. That's it. Installation of the Armory Craft dual adjustable trigger. If you go to armorycraft.com, my code SIGSAUERGUY5 works on all the products on that website. As always, thank you for watching and have a good day.